Neil Red FM.
Okay, let me get back to my phone lines. One of the questions on the census has been raising some conversation, and that is the question as to what is your sex? There are only two options on it, male and female. And I've been noticing that not everybody is happy and they feel there should be more options than that. And there's also people saying that there should be more options as well with regards to religion. But with regards to what sex, male, female. If you don't wish to put down male, female on the census, apparently you have an option in your time capsule note to put down whatever you want. But I think they're saying that with regards to the sex options in the census and indeed the religious options in the census, that they can't change them because of some European Union legislation. So they say their hands are tied in that regard. But this is a very interesting topic, actually, because earlier in the week then, I also got an email press release come in from the Countess.ie. I don't have it on my screen now. It's disappeared from the screen, but it was just telling us about what the Countess.ie is about and their beliefs and their fears and worries, I suppose, going forward. They have 10,000 people following them across all social media platforms, and their founder is Laoise de Brún, and she joins me by phone. Laoise, good morning.
Hi Neil, how are you?
I'm great.
Thank you so much for having me on.
And I'm mad keen to chat with you because this is very front and centre, particularly over the last few days now, because you might be aware of Leah Thomas, the swimmer, who made history last Thursday night to become the first transgender woman to win a National Athletics Association swimming championship. Are you aware of that story?
Oh, very well, of course, yes.
Yeah.
So the swimmer that used to be a mediocre male swimmer called Will.
That's right. He was a male swimmer and swam as a male, transitioned then, and now is swimming. But what was interesting was when Leah Thomas won the gold, the girl who won silver and bronze refused to stand next to Leah Thomas. And that was sending out a very strong message, I thought.
Well, I felt very, very heartened to see those young women make a point, as they did on the podium, because, we're hearing reports constantly that they're being gaslit, that there's team meetings, there's coach meetings, they've been told not to speak up, not to complain, and, there's heartbreaking stories of parents whose girls have been training, and we all know how grueling that training schedule is to become, a competitive swimmer. Yeah. And they're doing that all through their childhood and teens, then to really just to compete in a race in order to come second. The same seems to be happening in athletics, doesn't it, and other sports. Do the girls feel that there is an unfair advantage because of testosterone, is it? I think, if you ask anyone on the street if the boys had an unfair advantage over girls, they'd say, of course they do. I find it remarkable that we even have to discuss this. It tells you how influential this ideology has become within the English-speaking world, because we all know that we separate the sexes when it comes to sport, and we do that because, yes, as you said, obviously, because male puberty just bestows so much strength, power and speed and muscle mass to men. But the thing is, we don't really need to discuss that, do we? Because we all know that. It's just so obvious. Yeah, I know. I was reading up on it yesterday because World Athletics require transgender athletes to have low testosterone levels for at least 12 months before competing. And there is HRT treatment that one goes through while transitioning. That is the case. And, it's hugely controversial in America, very much so. They're talking about it an awful lot, not just sport, but also serving in the military and indeed what bathrooms people should be allowed to use. Where do you come down on all of that, your organisation? Well, you may be aware that almost a year ago, the Department of Education issued guidance to schools, which was in fact linked to funding, suggesting that all schools should remove their single-sex toilets, secondary schools, this is, across Ireland, and replace them with mixed-sex toilets. And we launched a campaign against this and tried to really empower parents in Ireland to be aware of their rights under the Education Act and under Bunreacht na hÉireann, and to get in touch with their schools and to make their voices heard. And in fact, we did manage to have a bit of a victory with that one, insofar as there has been a kind of a reverse of that decision, we hope. But the problem with this ideology is that it's really gotten a hold of society, and this is why we are where we are now, where something as vital as the census has really been dumbed down to such an extent that prime data, in terms of sex, will really essentially be destroyed, because if you can tick both boxes and then that actual piece of data is going to be randomly assigned, well, then it just makes a mockery.
Okay, so what will the census, so explain then, what would the census do if somebody who identifies as neither male nor female ticks both?
What they're saying is, the CSO is saying they'll randomly assign their sex. So not only in the first instance will people be ticking both, which is meaningless, because obviously that's not possible. Everyone is male or female. But then beyond that, in order to try to compute that, I suppose their algorithms or whatever, whoever does that job is just going to randomly assign a value anyway. So it achieves neither purpose.
Although I have spoken on air with people who do identify themselves as neither male nor female, and they live their life accordingly. They would call themselves non-binary.
Yes, and I do think, more power to them. People should be allowed to and empowered to express themselves and present however they wish. But when it comes to things like data and like sport, as we've just discussed, and like single-sex provision of intimate spaces like toilets, sex does matter. One sex does matter in those scenarios. And I think what we're looking at as a society in Ireland now is we're waking up to the unintended consequences of self-ID, which was brought in this country in 2015, very much under the radar, latched onto a very popular law, which was marriage equality, which, obviously people were behind, and that was a great step forward for us. But far less popular and therefore far less discussed was self-ID, which enables any man who wants to at any point fill out a form become a woman, and therefore access. And you
believe on that basis that any man can fill out any form and go through the treatment and become a woman, and that you say
there's no treatment. You see, Neil, you don't need to have any sort of hormone treatment or any.
The hormone treatment is for
whatsoever.
sport. Yeah. Well,
no, I'm just in terms of like the legislation that we brought in 2015. You can fill out a form, and there's no safeguarding. So in other countries, there might be a panel of doctors and lawyers, and you might have to live in your preferred gender, whatever that means, for 2 years.
Yeah.
And there's some kind of gatekeeping vis-a-vis, do you, for instance, like in Ireland, even if you're on remand for a sexual offence, you can still transition. And by transition, I don't mean in any medical sense. Or
not surgery-wise. It's just transitioning and saying, I now want to present as a woman, or I now want to present as a man. Going to the opposite sex. You think then that erodes women's rights?
Well, I think it absolutely does, and I think that's what people all around the world are realising now. I mean, I think, to be very honest with you, I think this was brought in very much from a place of compassion, and I fully accept that, and that is my own belief, and that's to be applauded. But now, when we step back and we look at the system that we've created, rather than talking about sort of trans rights, it's better to sort of take a step back and look at the system. The system essentially allows any man at any point to access those spaces, those shortlists, those sports teams. And therefore, of course, that will impact women's rights and child safeguarding, because, women's rights, we don't have them very long. We had to fight very hard for them. And they are predicated on us being a definable, discrete class. So,
what do you mean by child safeguarding?
Well, essentially, like if you're using, a women's changing room in a swimming pool, and, your 8-year-old child is getting dressed, let's say, or whatever, 4-year-old child.
I'm with you.
If a man who identifies as a woman can access that space, then that does present an issue.
Okay.
For example, there's real life examples of this. So in California, which is one of the states in America which has brought in what I kind of would term next level self-ID. So in Ireland, you can fill out a form and get a certificate, but in certain states of Canada and California, it looks like our government is trying to push us that direction. You don't even need any certification. Now, having said there is no actual safeguarding to that process in Ireland, there is actually a certification process, per se. But in those specific states, you can just identify in under the equality legislation of those countries, and that's what this government is trying to do in our country. They're trying to change.
So in America, you're saying already, or in some states, and I just need to be clear about this, because a lot of this is new to me. It's a very sensitive subject, incidentally, and big societal issues is attached to this for everybody. But in some states in America, a man who wishes to transition to a woman without surgery can present as a woman in woman's clothing and go into a woman's changing room where there are children.
Yes, so there was a case...
but in Ireland, you can't do that.
No. However, I think it's important that we're aware that there is a move on the part of the government to change the... We under our equality legislation, there's a whole slew of different acts. We have an exemption based on sex, but it's described as gender, but it's mean sex. And what it means is if the presence of someone of another gender could cause you embarrassment, it's the privacy exemption. But they're trying to change essentially that gender to mean gender identity. And once you do that, then
that is a big difference.
It's literally an open door, because it means that it's my right to be in that separate space where I am vulnerable, let's say in a toilet or change room.
Yes.
That right is not predicated on my biological sex. It's predicated on my identity. So therefore a man at any point can come in and say, well, I belong here. I deserve to be here. No one can stop me coming in here. And they wouldn't be allowed to be stopped if this goes through under equality legislation, because and
you're saying potentially this could happen and people should be aware of this. So, but even on that point alone, there are two specific issues here. One is a man who has transitioned to a woman, believes to be a woman, so has absolutely there's no risk to anybody in that changing room or toilet, other woman or child, because that man who's transitioned to a woman believes to be a woman and just wants to live their life, independently in that space. Is the issue with somebody who might pretend to be transing but actually be a paedophile?
So I think that if we think about safeguarding in terms of a system, and then we look at what we have, I think inadvertently, it's fair to say, done here, by trying to be kind and inclusive, and by framing this in a way that, this is a bit of admin to help a tiny fraction of people over there that has nothing to do with me. But really, when you step back, what we've done is eroded this whole system of safeguarding, which is pretty fundamental in society, really. So yes, I think I wouldn't say, I think it's more so, firstly, in terms of definitions, going back to what you just said a moment ago, you said if a man has transitioned. So by that, do you mean full surgery? No. I wasn't even thinking about that, because I've spoken to people on air who have trans but have not had surgery. Some have had top surgery, some have had none. Yes, you see, I think that's one of the issues that we find, is that in the... And I've spoken to women who have trans to men who have had top surgery and had breasts removed, but I've also spoken to women who have transitioned to men and wear strapping. Yeah, I've spoken to all of them. Yes. So I think quite often when people think about transition, they think about full surgery, but that's not necessarily what that means at all anymore. It could be, today I feel like a woman, and it can be very fluid. So therefore that creates issues, around how do we separate the sexes? So essentially the question we're faced with, do we separate our spaces, intimate spaces, based on sex, biological sex, or gender identity? And if we go with gender identity, how do we safeguard those spaces? So going back to what happened in a real life example in California, a man went into the women and girls section of this spa and exposed himself to women and an 8-year-old girl. And there was uproar, and the trans rights activists sort of said this woman was making it up initially, and then when there was footage of her complaining, she was a transphobe, it turns out that man was a serial sex offender. Because why wouldn't he? Going back to answer your point about predators, like why wouldn't they, if they could? If we've learned anything in this country, it's that if we do have gaps in our safeguarding, the predators will of course use them. And you see a time when that will actually happen here in Ireland and it will be legal? I mean, at the moment, what's happening, for example, with Leah Thomas stateside, there's nothing to stop that happening in Ireland, because we don't... Other countries that have brought in a self-ID have caveats regarding prison, regarding someone convicted or in remand for rape, so they've got sort of sensible little caveats to self-ID. But in Ireland, we sort of threw the baby out with the bathwater, really. We just thought this is a way to become pioneering and a world leader.
No, but at the same time, don't we have to have some compassion for people who do feel trapped and do want to change their lives and have a better life in that regard? Don't we have to help them?
Absolutely. And I think, I don't want to live in a society where they feel any oppression or face any discrimination whatsoever. And I think, I want to live in a society where a man who wants to present as a woman, is allowed to do so. I just think we have to be sensible, and we have to have a reasonable and measured conversation about the impact of self-ID on women and women's rights and child safeguarding, because clearly if any man at any point can identify into any space or onto any sports team or shortlist, then of course that will impact those rights and those safeguards.
Okay. Would your organisation be grounded then in the philosophy that you're born a man, you'll always be a man, you're born a woman, you're always biologically going to be a woman?
Yes, I think...
is that very much along the lines of what J.K. Rowling was attempting to say?
Yes, I think it's really important for people to come out and feel brave enough to speak truth to power, because this is a very powerful ideology, and really, the point is, we all know this, that you cannot change your sex. You can't, sex is binary and it's immutable. Whilst, of course, I have all compassion for people who struggle with their gender identity, and they should be supported. And no one should face discrimination in terms of, their workplace or housing or how they go about their daily life. But sex does matter when it comes to things like changing rooms, like toilets, like sports.
Yeah. And finally, then, can I just ask you then, what about, we're hearing an awful lot more about young people struggling now with their identity. It's like a form of gender dysphoria, in the sense that they're questioning more, and of course they have more opportunities and options now. There are dozens and dozens of different terms now that are being used that just don't include male and female anymore. According to healthline.com, there are 68 terms to describe gender identity and expression. Is that causing confusion amongst young children?
I think so, and I think we would be very concerned about resources that are being used in that regard in schools, like Belong To and Into LGBT Teachers Group have all released resources that teachers use, and they're used as sort of toolkits to teach very young children about gender identity. And it's quite clear that if you tell a small child that as they do in terms of these resources, we've seen them, a girl can change into a boy. Firstly, that's not true, so why are the adults that I trust lying to me? And secondly, it's interfering actually with a natural development. There is a critical time when a child is developing where they need to understand that sex is constant and invariable and stable across time. So basically the basic kind of building blocks, that if you're a boy, you'll become a man, and if you're a girl now, you're going to grow into a woman. And that is actually, it's a critical developmental phase that we disrupt.
But it could be life-saving for a child. And I've spoken to adults who, as children, had terrible, sad lives because they didn't feel they fitted in. And some of those that I spoke to did go through full surgery and changed. Okay, you say you can't biologically change the sex you're born, but they certainly changed with regards to surgery, and were never happier. They were so happy afterwards.
Well, to be honest with you, there's always been a cohort, typically always male, and normally it would present between ages 2 and 4, where they would have what we now call gender dysphoria, which is like extreme distress in your sexed body, and they typically would fully transition. But what we're seeing now is a complete different, it's a whole different paradigm. There's been an increase in of the number of teenage girls wanting to transition in the last 20 years. It's staggering. I'm going to read this slowly. 5,337% increase in young girls. And these girls are typically in their mid-teens.
Where is that stat from?
In Ireland, in England, and in America and Ireland, the data is all the same. It's.
But doesn't that mean that there's been a 5,337% increase in helping people to be happy?
Well, that is certainly what the gender identity ideologists would.
Of course, because you don't think they're making it up, do you?
Well, my answer to that would be, then where are all the late transitioning women? where's the huge swathe of 50-year-old women who want to transition, who are finally free to be their true selves and become men? They don't exist. What has always existed in history, as we know, in the Western world, is young girls who are teenage girls in particular. They have this tendency to manifest communally to this like psychic distress and pain. Sometimes, in girls' schools, typically you'll have issues with bulimia, with cutting. There's been historical issues with preponderance of, fainting or hysteria. Like teenage girls, they're hyper empathetic with each other, and if they're struggling, that can really spread. And now in the dawn of the internet age, let's say, for example, to give an example, you're 14, you're unhappy, there's things going on at home, let's say there's a divorce happening, it's ugly, and you're a lesbian, but you don't want to come out as a lesbian because that's not really cool. And you go online and you type in, am I lesbian? And you know what you get back? A deluge of trans ideology. Because it's not cool to be a lesbian anymore, but it's really cool to be non-binary.
Who says it's not cool to be a lesbian anymore?
That's the culture. That is the culture. And when one of our pillars, we have 8 pillars, and if maybe if you have time, you can have a look at our website, but one of our pillars is the erasure of lesbians, because they are the ones really at the, being sort of caught in a pincer grip, essentially, by this movement. Because on one hand, you have young lesbians been told, you're not a lesbian, you're actually a trans man. And on the other hand, you've got older lesbians being pressurised to accept men who identify as women, so people with penises, into their dating pool.
I have the 8 pillars of concern: single-sex provision, language, legislation, prisons, school and safeguarding, transitioning of minors, sport, and lesbian erasure. Do you have, is it like something like 10,000 people who subscribe?
Followers,
yeah. And do you find any negativity? Like if you speak about this, do you get any trolling or any abuse?
Yes, I've had personal abuse and attacks online, and concerted attempts really to try to take us down, take me down personally. But I've just kept going because I felt very strongly that we are a liberal democracy and we have to be able to discuss this as we are today. And I want to thank you so much for enabling this conversation, because it's badly needed in this country.
Well, what I would like to do now is to get people's thoughts on my conversation with you, and also how they feel about the change of society, whether it's going in the right direction or the wrong. I see texts and calls coming in on this. So if anybody wants to follow up with your beliefs and what you do, it's thecountess.ie, am I right?
Yes, and we have a YouTube channel called The Countess Conversations, and we offer expert webinars, because our view is that it's really important to provide clinically sound and legally sound information, so that parents then can make up their own minds on how best to support their children. We have a pamphlet called Empowering Parents. It's written by a psychologist and a barrister, because there's a lot of information out there, but a lot of it is from essentially lobby groups who are coming at it from only one aspect. But we try and step back and look at it in the round, because we're all in society together after all.
Okay.
And it has to work for everyone. Okay,
thecountess.ie. Leisha, thanks for taking the call. Feel free to hold on if you wish. You can also respond if you want. I know Kieran just wanted to pick up on a couple of thoughts there, and perhaps a couple of comments on my conversation with you. Kieran, good morning.
Morning, Neil. Morning, Leisha. Thanks for taking my call. I guess I've been listening to what you've been saying, and I'm honestly a bit appalled by it. I think that, if you take away someone's access to to use public bathrooms, then you take away their ability to exist in public space. Any conversations I've had with transgender people in the past, they're constantly anxious and planning where they're going to go to the bathroom just because they want to go out for the day.
Is this in Ireland, Cork? Are these conversations you have amongst us?
Yeah, this is in conversations I've had in Cork with some of the trans community here.
You're not a member of the trans community?
No, I'm not. I'm not trans myself. I'm gay, but I'm not trans.
Okay.
Yeah. And I suppose.
And so, what do they say? That they struggle, or they worry, or they panic about where they can go to the loo? Is it?
Yeah, no, probably more so in the past. But yeah, just trying to plan if they wanted to go out to a pub with friends, or go to a restaurant, or go out shopping. They might think, where's the bathroom that I can use? Do you know? Do I have to worry if I have to worry about, can I pass for female or pass for male? And I might not. Will I be called up when I go to the bathroom?
Do you mind me asking? Have they been called up on it in female bathrooms?
I wouldn't be able to say really. I suppose it's hard to know. But
okay, but they certainly struggle with it. Yeah,
certainly struggle. Certainly a concern.
Say in a bathroom or in a changing room, and then you have an issue with the short jump to paedophilia. Is it?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a huge implication from what Alicia's saying that transgender people are
can I just say, Kieran, that she didn't bring it up at all. I did. So, if you want to pick up on it, it was a suggestion and a question that I raised. But go ahead also.
Okay, well, fair enough. But, I mean, I think there is a huge implication there that trans people are trying to get into public bathrooms because they want to...
No, that wasn't the point that was being made, even by me, and sometimes I don't make it clearly. I was saying, could it not allow for somebody who is a sex offender or a paedophile access by pretending?
I mean, I suppose it could, but
that was the point. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it's they can go into bathrooms anyway, and they could go into same-sex bathrooms. You know, as much as they can go into opposite-sex bathrooms. And when you go into a public changing room in a pool, you'll often get fathers bringing in their young daughters into the men's changing room. You know, so there's those. People
I mean, I remember it back in the day. Fathers brought their daughters into men's changing rooms, and also mothers brought their sons into women's dressing rooms.
Exactly, and that's going to continue. You know, I think the proportion of transgender people in those change rooms is quite small. Okay. So I don't really see.
So you don't see any support at all for safe spaces for women.
No, I think that is essential. I think women do have their own specific needs as a group in society, I think that there should be protection for women's rights as well as transgender rights, and I don't think they have to conflict with each other.
Okay, I'd love to get more of the public's thoughts on it. Did you want to respond to that, Leisha, before I let you go?
Yes, I would actually. I just wanted to ask the caller, do you think that Darren Morager, the serial sex offender who accessed the female part of the spa in California I was discussing, I mean, he was emboldened by the self-ID laws there, clearly. So you're agreeing with me insofar as it is possible, you said, that predators, paedophiles, whatever you want to say, describe them as they will access those spaces. Why wouldn't they if there's no safeguarding?
He said that there is the potential. No, I think he did say that there's the potential for that to happen. But
which is good, because at least we're in agreement on that. Because I really am not, and I would really hate to be misinterpreted as saying that, you know, people who identify as trans are predators. That's certainly not what I feel. I just think we have to take a step back and go, wait a minute, what have we done here? We've created this system where, of course, predators will use it to access victims. Of course they will. Why wouldn't they?
Yes, but at the same time, one must be compassionate and supportive to people who aren't, say, sex offenders, will never be a sex offender, will never be a paedophile, but want to identify differently. Surely.
And maybe just want to go to the bathroom.
Or just want to use the loo.
As we speak now, there are men who identify as women, one of whom is a paedophile, you know, one of whom is violent, and one of whom is a homicidal rapist, all locked up in the women's wing of Limerick Prison. I mean, where's the compassion for those women? Those women are the most vulnerable in society. The gateway to incarceration for women, this is according to criminologists worldwide, is male violence. So they've been victims of male violence, and now they're locked up with men who identify as women. And that's down to our self-ID laws in this country.
Okay,
and it's unconscionable. It's unconscionable.
Okay, just one quick one if you don't mind. Gerard, good morning.
Good morning, Neil.
Did you try and engage with Countess.ie?
Oh, I've done more than that. I've actually spoken on the phone with Leisha, I think, and we've exchanged emails and Twitter DMs. I mean, I'm generally supportive of the work the Countess is doing, but I don't actually understand what it is doing. For example, I don't know if you discussed the Red Sea poll that the Countess had commissioned.
No.
Well, they commissioned a poll, which was very useful, and I had asked the Countess what government departments and state bodies like the Irish Human Rights Commission they had sent it to, in order that I could send FOI requests about it to see.
So a Red C poll that wasn't public, is it?
Well, the Countess says it is public.
It is there. So why what was the Red C poll about?
Oh, I can't remember the details of.
Alicia.
Okay, I'll leave Alicia speak.
Essentially, we ran a poll with Red C. It was an independent poll, and we wanted to kind of get beyond this language. There's this very fuzzy language used all the time about inclusivity. And we wanted to really ask people in plain English, beyond all the jargon, how do you feel, for instance, about should a man identified as a woman be allowed to give an intimate medical exam? 77% said no, that you should be allowed, ask for someone of the same biological sex, and that gender identity shouldn't trump that. We asked about single-sex wards. 64% said no, they should remain single-sex based on sex, not on gender identity.
Right.
62% were in favour of bathrooms remaining single-sex based on sex, not gender identity. This is obviously in contrast to what your previous caller
And this
said.
was just anybody could respond to this Red C poll.
Yes.
They went out and asked people. They went and asked people should women's bathrooms remain only women's bathrooms and men's, and they should never change. 62 and 64% said don't change. What
we found was, and we were heartened by this, and this is true of polling worldwide. There's lots of polls happening in America, which is actually what engendered the whole movement Save Women's Sports in America. It was polls initially that gave birth to that movement, which is kind of resisting the incursion of males into female sports.
Or as you would say, the eradication of the word mother and women from general society. Yeah, okay.
Well, what we found with the poll was, far from being extremist in any way, our view is the view of the ordinary person on the street, of the public.
And I want to get their view in a moment, and I'll be encouraging them to get in touch and to text their thoughts. I might even run a poll myself. But Jared, are you saying, were you blocked by the Countess.ie?
Yes, that's correct. I had been... I had had a very constructive relationship with the Countess site, and I was supportive. But when I asked questions like what government departments and organisations was this poll sent to, everything changed. People who had been supportive of me became quite aggressive. And
well, why should it matter? It's a Red C poll that's up on their website. It doesn't matter what government department was sent to.
Send to government departments like the Minister for Children and to the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission would show that there are legitimate concerns about the issues that the Countess site is actually talking about.
Okay.
It would be a positive step.
Yeah, I think it's quite positive that they're talking at all, in fairness. One may not necessarily agree with them, but at least they have a voice.
Correct, but they have quite a strong voice, which is why I can't understand why they wouldn't even answer that question if they had sent it to the Minister.
All right, okay, well, listen.
It was actually sent to every single TD and Senator in Ireland. So we do a lot of heavy lifting.
Briefly, I'm not going to be honest, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time because I don't see the relevance of that.
I think we're going down a rabbit hole actually with this.
Yeah.
Well, what's the point of sending that poll to TDs but not to ministers? If it's sent to ministers, it becomes an official document.
Did you send it to every minister and TD, Alicia?
Yes.
Okay, answers the question. Okay, listen, thank you all so much. Thank you to Jared, thank you to Kieran, and to you as well, Alicia, from the Countess.ie. Let me throw it open to everybody else. Your thoughts on the conversation, text 0868 104 106. You can also, if you have a story to share, email Neil at redfm.ie or pick up the phone on 0818 104 106. Come back in a moment. Text